Nobody in Millfield thought Owen Calloway would last long as a single father. Too quiet, too steady, too ordinary. So when Diana Voss, owner of 3 dealerships and a reputation built on crushing smaller people, decided to have some fun, she chose Owen's driveway. 12 rusted, broken, engine-dead cars appeared overnight. A gift from Diana and her circle, deliberately meant to be a punchline, meant to bury him in debt and shame. What Diana didn't know was what Owen had spent 15 years hiding, not just how to fix cars, but how to own the people who broke them. Press play right now and find out how one quiet father turned 12 junkers into the deal of a lifetime. Owen Calloway woke at 5:30 every morning without an alarm. He moved through the house in a particular order: coffee first, then oatmeal on the stove, then 3 quiet knocks on the door at the end of the hallway. The knocks were never louder than necessary, and Bonnie always answered them the same way. A small groan, then the shuffle of feet, then the door opening to reveal a 7-year-old with tangled hair and serious eyes. Their house on Cartmill Road was a single story with a narrow front yard and a garage that held more tools than it did cars. The neighbors who had lived on that street long enough knew that Owen kept to himself, paid his bills on time, and never asked for anything. The ones who hadn't lived there long assumed he was simply unremarkable. Neither group was entirely right. Owen had been in Millfield for 7 years, long enough that most people had stopped wondering about him, which was exactly how he preferred it. He had a few routines, a few friendships that did not require much maintenance, and a daughter who had inherited, in equal measure, his quietness and his way of watching things before deciding what to think about them. Bonnie was the kind of child who asked one precise question where other children asked 5 imprecise ones. Owen answered her questions with the same seriousness he brought to everything else, which had produced, by the time she was 7, a girl with an unusually accurate picture of how the world worked, and a deep preference for honesty over comfort. The garage told a different story if anyone had known how to read it. Along the back wall hung tools on a pegboard, each one in its exact place, each one worn smooth from years of use. On the floor beside the workbench sat a metal toolbox painted red, or what had once been red. Now a faded rust orange where the paint had chipped and aged. It had belonged to Owen's father, and before that to no one Owen knew of. Bonnie was not allowed to touch it, though she sat on top of it nearly every evening while her father worked, swinging her legs and asking questions he almost always answered. Owen worked as a mechanic at the community garage on Miller Street, fixing trucks and lawn equipment and the occasional water pump for whoever needed it. The pay covered what they needed and not much else. He did not complain about this. He did not seem to notice it. On a Tuesday morning in early October, his neighbor Lucas came around before 8 with 2 cups of gas station coffee and the look of someone who had heard something worth repeating. Lucas was a broad-shouldered man with calloused hands and a habit of arriving unannounced, which Owen had long since stopped minding. They sat on the front steps while Bonnie ate inside. Lucas said that Diana Voss had been making moves on the land along Cartmill Road, specifically the parcels between the hardware store and the old feed lot, which happened to include the lot Owen was sitting on. Owen listened without interrupting. When Lucas finished, Owen said only that he was not selling. Lucas nodded like he'd expected that answer, and the 2 men finished their coffee without saying much else. Before she left for school that morning, Bonnie took her father's hand on the front steps and looked up at him with the particular seriousness she reserved for important questions. She asked why people always looked at them the way they did, the sideways glances, the polite silences that lasted a beat too long. Owen looked at her and said it was because they didn't know who he was yet. Bonnie accepted this, and they walked to the car. Diana Voss had built her reputation the way certain people build walls, one deliberate stone at a time, placed to keep things out as much as to hold things up. She had inherited 1 dealership from her father 8 years earlier and turned it into 3, pushing her annual revenue past $40 million through a combination of precise financial maneuvering and a talent for identifying when someone else's weakness was her opportunity. Her offices occupied the top floor of the Voss Auto Group headquarters on Renfield Avenue. Glass walls, steel fixtures, and framed magazine covers arranged in a line that read like a timeline of her ambitions being realized. She was not a loud person. She had learned early that volume was what people used when they lacked precision, and precision was the thing she had in abundance. Her assistant Jessica had worked for her for 2 years and had absorbed, through careful observation, the most important rule of the office. Diana's silences were never empty. They were loaded. She was the kind of person who made other people feel that the room became smaller when she entered it, not through intimidation exactly, but through a quality of attention that suggested she was always calculating something, and that the calculation would eventually produce a result that was inconvenient for whoever had miscalculated in her presence. The staff at all 3 dealerships knew this. The suppliers knew it. The local officials who attended Diana's quarterly breakfasts knew it best of all. The 4th dealership had been Diana's plan for 3 years. The location on Cartmill Road sat at the intersection of Route 9 and the approach to the new commercial development going up on the east side of Millfield, the kind of geography that a person in Diana's business did not find. Twice, she had offered fair prices through 2 separate brokers. Most of the landowners along that corridor had accepted. Owen Callaway had declined both offers without explanation, which Diana found more interesting than annoying. She told Jessica to find out who he was. The report came back thin: mechanic, single father, quiet life, no apparent financial ambitions. Diana read it twice, set it down, and said that if a man had no ambitions, there was usually something else keeping him in place. Something they hadn't found yet. She told Jessica to arrange a different kind of conversation, the kind that didn't require a broker. What followed was not spontaneous. It required a flatbed company, 4 separate towing services operating across a single overnight window, and a man in the county assessor's office who owed Diana a favor. 12 vehicles were sourced from salvage lots and impound auctions across 3 counties, chosen specifically because each one had already been rejected by repair shops, tagged beyond economical repair, stripped of value in the official record. The cost of the operation to Diana was under $4,000. The vehicles were deposited in 2 rows along Owen Callaway's front drive before 5 in the morning, while the neighborhood slept. Each one bore a handwritten sign that read, "For scrap sale," and each sign was stamped with the name of a different failed repair shop, as though Owen had been collecting them. Owen came outside at 6:15 to get the newspaper and stopped at the edge of the porch. He stood there long enough for the coffee to cool in his hand. Bonnie appeared beside him a few minutes later, rubbing her eyes, and looked at the 2 rows of rusted, broken, deflated, shattered vehicles filling the driveway from the gate to the street. She asked if someone had given them cars. Owen said nothing for a moment. Then Lucas appeared from across the yard, moving fast, because Lucas had seen the trucks come in the night before and had not known what to do with what he had witnessed. He told Owen what he had seen. Owen listened with the same expression he wore for most things still, attentive, without visible alarm. The neighborhood was waking up. A few people had already stopped on the sidewalk. Phones were out. Within the hour, a local message group had posted a photograph of the driveway, with a caption that the people who had arranged all of this found very satisfying. A woman who lived 2 doors down leaned against her mailbox and shook her head. A man walking his dog slowed down, took a photograph, and kept walking. A teenager on a bicycle circled the block twice. None of them knocked on Owen's door to ask if he was all right. In fairness, they would not have known how to frame the question. It was the kind of spectacle that produced commentary more easily than compassion, and Millfield was not unlike most towns in that regard. A patrol officer named Greer came by mid-morning and filled out a report while Owen explained, calmly and without irritation, that he had not requested these vehicles, had not arranged their delivery, and had no knowledge of where they had originated. Officer Greer wrote everything down and said he would look into it. What he did not say was that he had received a call the night before from the city manager's office, where a certain account of events had already been established, one in which Owen Callaway was described as having begun unauthorized accumulation of salvage vehicles on a residential property in violation of municipal zoning code. By noon, Owen had received a formal notice from the Department of Urban Management. He had 30 days to clear the property or face a compliance review and possible asset freeze. Owen read the letter at the kitchen table while Bonnie finished her lunch. Then he folded it, set it in the drawer with the utility bills, and went out to the garage. He walked the length of both rows of vehicles slowly, flashlight in hand, stopping at each one. He crouched beside certain cars for longer than others. He knocked on frames with 2 knuckles. He pressed his palm flat against chassis metal and listened. Bonnie watched from the porch. When Owen reached the 8th car in the 2nd row, a battered shell of a vehicle that had been painted over so many times its original color was impossible to guess, he was still for a long time. On his way back inside, he stopped at the edge of the driveway and bent down to pick up a small stone from the gravel. He turned it over once in his fingers and put it in the pocket of his jacket. Lucas, who had been watching all of this from the fence, did not ask why. He had learned, over years of friendship, that Owen's actions clarified themselves eventually. That evening, Owen did not call a lawyer. He did not go to the city manager's office. He did not post anything publicly or ask anyone for sympathy. He went to the phone and called a man named Adrian, who worked in automotive consulting out of Chicago and who had known Owen a long time. Owen described each vehicle in turn: engine condition, chassis response, body damage, frame integrity, with the calm specificity of someone reading from a well-organized report. He was 7 cars in when Adrian interrupted him. He asked Owen to describe the 8th car again. Owen did. There was a silence on the line that lasted several seconds. Then Adrian asked, very quietly, whether the frame on the 8th car was original. Owen said he had checked it. Adrian said something that sounded like a prayer, and Owen said he had already made note of that one. He told Adrian he would be in touch and hung up the phone. Later that night, after Bonnie was asleep and the house was quiet, Owen sat at the kitchen table with a pad of paper and went through each car from memory, writing a number beside each one. He did not share these numbers with anyone. He put the paper in the drawer with the utility bills and the compliance notice, turned off the kitchen light, and went to bed. In the morning, he pulled the first car into the garage and opened the hood. He worked with the kind of efficiency that comes not from hurry but from certainty, knowing exactly what a problem is before beginning to address it, so that no motion is wasted. The Honda sedan went in on a Wednesday and came out on Friday. Clean interior, new brake pads, fresh transmission fluid, engine running without hesitation. Owen listed it on the local marketplace for $3,800 and answered the first inquiry within the hour. It sold before noon. The Chevy truck took 3 days and needed a valve job, which Owen completed without sending out for parts because he had ordered them Tuesday. That one sold for $5,200. Lucas helped where Owen directed him, which mostly meant handing tools and holding things in place, which Lucas did without complaint, because he understood by now that something was happening here that he did not fully grasp, but that he trusted completely. Diana received a report from Jessica on Friday afternoon. Owen Callaway had sold 2 cars. Diana was not concerned. She had sent 12. Even if he managed to move all of them, which she considered unlikely, she still held the compliance notice, the city manager's goodwill, and the zoning review scheduled for the end of the month. She told Jessica to file an anonymous complaint with the county environmental office, citing potential illegal disposal of motor oil on residential land. The environmental inspector arrived the following Tuesday. Owen walked him through the garage, pointed out the oil containment system he had installed years earlier, a gravity-fed basin with a sealed drum collector, well within code, technically above the minimum standard. The inspector signed off and left. Diana received that report too. She told Jessica to escalate. Jessica, who had learned not to ask about the ethics of the things she was asked to do, made the calls. The escalation came in the form of a notice from the city licensing office. Owen had been selling vehicles from a residential address, which potentially required a dealer's license. Without one, each additional sale could carry a fine of $500 per transaction. Owen received this notice on a Thursday and called Carter Webb the same afternoon. Carter was a lawyer who specialized in vehicle commerce and property law, and he had been referred by Adrian. Carter reviewed the situation and told Owen 3 things. First, that individual private citizens were permitted to sell up to 5 personal vehicles per calendar year without a dealer's license. Second, that the 2 cars Owen had already sold were within that limit. And third, that Carter could obtain a temporary dealer permit for Owen within 10 business days, which would cover any sales beyond the personal threshold for the remainder of the year. Owen told Carter to file for the permit. Carter said he would have it by the following Wednesday. Owen thanked him and went back to the garage. That evening, Bonnie showed Owen a drawing she had made at school, 12 cars lined up in a row, with a tall figure standing beside them holding a toolbox. The teacher had asked the class to draw something important that happened recently. Bonnie said the teacher had asked what the figure in the drawing was doing. Bonnie had said he was counting his money. Owen looked at the drawing for a moment, then folded it and put it in his shirt pocket. The 3rd through 6th cars came out in 9 days. Owen worked in the evenings after Bonnie went to sleep and on weekend mornings before she woke up. He kept a notebook on the workbench where he logged every part ordered, every hour worked, every dollar spent. Lucas came by most evenings and did what he was asked. Adrian began sourcing parts from his Chicago network, shipping them on 2-day delivery when the local suppliers didn't carry what Owen needed. The Jeep went for $6,400. The Ford pickup, which needed more work than the others but had a cleaner frame than anyone would have guessed from the exterior, went for $7,800 to a contractor outside of town, who needed it the same week. A Volkswagen sedan, which had more wrong with it than Owen initially assessed, sold for $3,500, the only car that came in below his projected number, which Owen noted in his log without complaint. A BMW 3 Series from 2009 needed a rebuilt alternator, 2 new control arms, and fresh tires. But the body panels were straight, and the interior was intact. Owen listed it for $9,200 and received 4 inquiries the first morning. He sold it to the second caller after asking 2 questions: whether the buyer intended to drive it daily and whether they had a reliable mechanic. The buyer said yes to both. Owen said the car would serve them well. Then there was the 8th car, the one Adrian had gone quiet about on the phone. Owen had known from the moment he crouched beside it in the dark that first night that it was a different category of problem from the others. Not a problem in the sense of difficulty, but in the sense of significance. The vehicle had been buried under 4 poorly applied layers of paint, its interior gutted and its windshield gone, and whoever had left it at an impound lot in Benton County had clearly had no idea what they were discarding. Owen had spent 20 minutes on it that first night, without touching it, just looking, moving his flashlight slowly across the body lines, pressing 2 fingers against the firewall, listening. He had sent Adrian 40 photographs the following morning, and Adrian, a man who had spent 20 years in this industry and who was not given to overstatement, had called back within the hour and used language that Owen did not normally associate with him. A collector in Chicago, a man Adrian had worked with for years, paid $38,000 for it without negotiating and arranged transport the same week. When the transfer was complete, Adrian called Owen and said that whoever had dumped those cars in his driveway had made a very expensive mistake. Owen said that was one way to put it. While Owen worked, he had also begun to read. Not about cars, about Voss Auto Group. He pulled the business registration filings, the annual tax disclosures that were publicly accessible, and the records from 2 commercial real estate transactions Diana had made in the previous 5 years. Carter helped him navigate the financial documents, translating the accounting into plain terms. What they found was not catastrophic, but it was not comfortable either. Voss Auto was carrying $4.2 million in commercial debt with Meridian Bank, structured as a variable rate loan taken out 3 years earlier to finance the expansion from 2 dealerships to 3. The rate had adjusted upward twice in the past year. More importantly, the loan agreement contained a performance covenant quarterly sales benchmarks that, if missed for 2 consecutive periods, gave the bank the right to renegotiate terms or place the account on a watch list. Diana's first quarter had come in 18% below target. Her second quarter had not recovered. The third quarter was 3 weeks from closing. Owen wrote all of this down in a second notebook, not the parts log but a different one, kept in the drawer of his bedroom nightstand. He did not discuss it with Lucas. He mentioned it to Carter only in the form of a single question: whether a commercial loan could be sold by a bank to a private buyer at a discount if the bank wished to reduce its portfolio risk. Carter looked at him for a moment, then said yes, it could, and that the typical discount on a distressed commercial note ran between 6 and 15%, depending on the borrower's perceived recovery profile. Owen asked him to find out whether Meridian was considering any such action with regard to the Voss account. Carter said he would make some calls. The seventh car was a Ford Mustang from 1969. Owen had known what it was. The first night he walked the row with his flashlight had known from the silhouette before he even lifted the hood. Someone had painted over the original finish with 3 layers of a dull orange that had no business being on that car. The interior had been stripped. The windshield was gone. But the chassis rang clean under his knuckle knock, and the engine block, though seized from sitting, was the original unit. Owen did not begin work on it after completing car 6. He brought it into the garage, set up 2 work lights, and stood in front of it for a long time with his hands in his pockets. Bonnie appeared in the doorway in her pajamas, asking why he was just looking at it. He told her some things deserved a proper introduction before you started taking them apart. She accepted this and went back to bed. He spent 11 days on the Mustang. Not because it required 11 days of continuous labor, it didn't, but because he was not in a hurry with it, and because the work required the kind of patience that could not be rushed without cost. He stripped the paint layers down to bare metal and found underneath them a color he had not expected. A pale mint green, factory original, barely visible under decades of cover. He restored the engine, rebuilt the interior from sourced materials, replaced the glass, and refinished the body in the same mint green using a custom-matched formula he ordered from a specialty paint supplier Adrian recommended. He did not explain to anyone why he had chosen to restore that particular color. He told no one what the color meant. When the Mustang was finished, he started the engine in the garage and listened to it run for 4 minutes, without saying anything. Then he turned it off, pulled the door down, and closed it inside. The Mustang was not listed for sale. The other 10 cars, the ones sold before the Mustang was finished, had been documented, titled, and transferred legally, with copies of every transaction on file with Carter's office. On the 29th day of the 30-day window, Owen emailed the Department of Urban Management with photographs and transfer documentation, confirming that 11 vehicles had been legally sold and removed from the property, and that 1 vehicle, the 1969 Mustang, remained on the property as personal property of the owner. The driveway was clear. There was no ongoing violation. The compliance review had nothing to act on. When Diana received the copy of that email through her contact in the city manager's office, she sat very still in her office chair for a long moment. Then she asked Jessica how many cars Owen had sold, and for how much. Jessica had done the research. 11 vehicles, ranging from $3,800 at the low end to $5,200 for the truck to $9,200 for a BMW 3 Series from 2009. And then the 8th car, the one Diana's procurement team had found at an impound lot in Benton County and paid $400 to include in the delivery, a 1988 BMW E30 M3, which a collector in Chicago, introduced by Adrian, had purchased for $38,000 after Owen sent a detailed condition report with 40 photographs. Diana heard the number and said nothing for several seconds. Jessica did not fill the silence. Total gross from 11 cars, just over $119,000. Estimated net after parts, transport, and Carter's fees, somewhere above $90,000. Diana had spent under $4,000 to make it happen. She told Jessica to find out who Owen Callaway really was, not the mechanic on Miller Street. The person who had known what a 1988 BMW E30 M3 was in the dark with a flashlight and 2 knuckles. Jessica came back with a name: Hartwell Restoration Group, Detroit. Owen had worked there for 11 years before leaving. Senior restoration engineer. He had assessed, rebuilt, and brokered vehicles worth considerably more than anything currently sitting in Diana's 3 showrooms. He had left without public explanation, and no one at Hartwell had spoken about it, the kind of silence that suggested a departure made on good terms, but underweight. Diana stared at the name Hartwell on the page for a long time. Then she asked Jessica to pull the current Voss financial reports. She needed to see the third quarter numbers. The numbers were not good. Carter called Owen on a Monday morning, 3 weeks after the compliance deadline had passed, and told him that Meridian Commercial Bank had placed the Voss auto account on its internal watch list following a 3rd consecutive quarter below the performance covenant threshold. The bank was not in default proceedings, not yet, but was quietly exploring options to reduce its exposure on the note. Carter said he had made preliminary contact with the relevant officer at the bank. The note was $4.2 million at face value. Given current circumstances, the bank would likely consider an offer in the range of $3.7 to $3.8 million, a discount of roughly 10%, from a qualified buyer who could demonstrate financial stability and purpose. Owen asked Carter how long the window for that kind of approach would stay open. Carter said weeks, not months. Owen told him to move forward. The money from the 12 cars, combined with a personal line of credit Owen had opened 14 years earlier and never touched, maintained, through 15 years of careful, quiet living, gave him the collateral basis. Carter needed to structure the acquisition offer. Owen did not take this lightly. He spent 3 evenings going through the numbers with Carter, asking questions until every term was clear. He was not reckless with it. He was not emotional about it. He simply understood, with the same methodical clarity that had guided him through every other step, that an opportunity of this kind did not arrive twice. The community meeting at Millfield Town Hall fell on the 3rd Thursday of the month, as it always did. Diana had a standing item on the agenda, the Cartmill Road development proposal, which had been submitted months earlier and which had survived 2 preliminary reviews. She arrived with Jessica and 2 associates from her legal team, dressed in the kind of way that communicated she considered the outcome settled. The hall was more full than usual. Hannah Marsh, a reporter from the Millfield Register, who had been covering the story since the morning the 12 cars appeared, sat in the 2nd row with a notepad. Owen arrived after Diana and sat in the middle section. He was wearing a jacket over a flannel shirt. He had not brought Bonnie. Diana presented the Cartmill Road proposal with efficiency. When she reached the section describing the final parcel, the Callaway property, she named Owen directly and described it as the last outstanding holdout in an otherwise consolidated development plan. The room shifted. The city manager invited comment from the floor. Owen stood without being called on twice. He spoke without using a microphone, in a voice that was level and reached the back of the room without effort. He said he was not selling the land on Cartmill Road, and he explained, for the first time publicly, why. His wife had died in that house. His daughter had been born in that house. There was no price for it. He did not say this angrily. He said it the way a person states something that is simply true and requires no defense. A woman in the 3rd row pressed her lips together. A man near the back stopped checking his phone. The city manager looked at his notes without writing anything. Then Owen said he had a different proposal to make. He said he wished to purchase Voss Auto Group's primary dealership, the flagship location on Renfield Avenue, at fair market value, with all current staff retained under existing contracts and with full operational continuity. He said he had reviewed the business, had adequate financing in place, and could close within 45 days. He did not look at Diana as he said it. He looked at the city manager, then at the room. The quality of silence in a room changes depending on what has just been said, and the silence that followed Owen's proposal was of a particular kind, not shocked, but recalibrating, the sound of a large group of people revising a story they had thought they already knew the end of. When he finished, he reached into his jacket pocket and placed a small stone on the table in front of him, a piece of gravel from a driveway on Cartmill Road. He left it there and sat down. Lucas, sitting 3 rows behind him, looked at the stone and understood finally what it meant. Hannah was writing so fast her notepad made a sound. The room was quiet enough to hear the ventilation system. Diana stood at her table across the hall. She looked at the stone. She looked at Owen. People were watching her in the way people watch someone who has just been handed an accounting they did not expect and cannot immediately calculate. Jessica stared at the table. Hannah was writing. Diana was, for the first time, in a long time, without a prepared answer. She said, after a pause that everyone in the room felt, that she would consider the proposal. She said it without the inflection of dismissal or concession, said it the way someone says a thing when they genuinely have not yet decided. As the meeting broke up and people moved toward the exits, Diana passed Owen near the door. She stopped. She said she was surprised, not by the offer, but by the fact that he had never once tried to embarrass her throughout the entire thing. Not the cars, Not the compliance notice, not the environmental complaint, none of it. She said that was unusual. Owen looked at her steadily and said that it had not been necessary. He said she had handled the embarrassment herself. He said it without edge, the way a person states a fact they find neither satisfying nor entertaining, simply accurate. Diana looked at him for a moment. Then she walked out. The deal closed 39 days later. The flagship Voss dealership on Renfield Avenue was transferred to Callaway Auto, a sole proprietorship registered at the Cartmill Road address. The price was fair. Carter had insisted on a full appraisal, and Owen had paid what the appraisal said without negotiating it down, which Diana noted and did not comment on. The existing staff of 22 people received written confirmation from Owen on the day of closing that their contracts would be honored without modification. 2 of them asked to speak with him individually, wanting to understand who he was and what his plans were. Owen met with both of them in the break room, drank coffee, and answered their questions directly. He told them he intended to run a clean shop that charged fair prices and stood behind its work. He said he wasn't interested in being the largest dealership in the county. He was interested in being the most trustworthy one. Both employees came back the following week. Diana had signed a brief consulting arrangement as part of the sale terms not required, but structured as an option Owen had offered, and she had accepted after a day's consideration. It gave her a seat at the table for supplier renegotiations, where her relationships with distributors were worth more than most of what Owen could have built from scratch. She came in on Tuesdays. She and Owen did not discuss the 12 cars. They discussed inventory margins, service department efficiency, and the structural weaknesses in 2 of the existing supplier contracts. Diana was precise and useful in these conversations, and Owen was attentive. There was no warmth between them yet, but there was something more durable than warmth. Mutual clarity about what each person brought to the table and what they expected in return. On a Saturday afternoon in the 3rd week after the closing, Owen brought Bonnie to the dealership. They walked through the whole building together. The showroom floor where 3 cars sat under the lighting. The service bay where 2 technicians were running end-of-week checks. The customer lounge that still smelled of the coffee machine Diana had chosen 3 years earlier. Bonnie walked beside her father with her hands behind her back, looking at everything carefully. When they had made the full circuit, she looked up at Owen and asked if this was theirs now. Owen crouched down to her level and told her that it was theirs and also the people who worked there, and that his job was to take care of both. Bonnie nodded. She asked if the hose on the service bay floor was a tripping hazard. Owen looked, then called out to one of the technicians to coil it. The technician did. Bonnie looked satisfied. That evening, Owen went back to the garage at the house on Cartmill Road. He let himself in through the side door, turned on the single overhead light, and stood in front of the mint-green Mustang. He put his hand on the hood the way he sometimes did, flat, still, like a greeting. He had told Lucas, when Lucas asked, that the car was Bonnie's, that he was keeping it for her until she was old enough to drive it. That was true, but it was not the whole truth, and Owen did not pretend otherwise, at least not to himself. The color had been his wife's favorite. She had pointed it out once on a car passing through their old neighborhood in Detroit, had turned to him in the passenger seat, and said that if she ever had a car, that was the color she would want. He had remembered it the way he remembered certain things completely, without effort, for the rest of his life. He stood in the garage for a while, with the light on. Then he turned it off, locked the door, and went inside to make dinner. On a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks after the closing, Owen woke at 5:30 without an alarm. He made coffee, put oatmeal on the stove, and knocked 3 times on Bonnie's door. She appeared in the hallway with her hair flattened on one side, eyes half open. He told her he needed someone to help open the dealership that morning. She stared at him. He said he couldn't manage the key by himself. She knew this was not true. She had seen him change a transmission by himself, and a key was considerably simpler, but she also understood, in the way that children who have been paying close attention understand things, that the invitation was not really about the key. She went to her room and came back dressed in under 4 minutes. Owen picked up the red metal toolbox from its place on the garage floor and set it in the trunk of the car. Bonnie watched him do this. She asked why he was bringing it. He said it was the first day. It felt right to bring it. They drove to Renfield Avenue in the early quiet of a Tuesday morning, the town not yet fully awake, the traffic lights cycling through their colors for nobody in particular. Bonnie looked out the window at the passing streets, with the focused attention she gave most things. Owen drove without the radio on. When they pulled into the lot and Owen cut the engine, Bonnie looked at the building still carrying the old signage, which Owen had not yet replaced, and then looked at her father. She asked if they were going to change the name on the sign. Owen said yes, eventually. She asked what it would say. He told her the name. She said it out loud once, quietly, testing it. Then she nodded and opened her door. Owen Calloway had never set out to own a dealership. He had not moved to Millfield with ambitions of that kind. He had moved there because the house on Cartmill Road was where he could be close to the memory of his wife and still be present enough to raise his daughter correctly. He had taken the job on Miller Street because it was honest work and because it kept his hands in what he knew. He had declined Diana's offers because some things are not for sale, not for any number, and he had always known exactly which things those were. What happened after the 12 cars arrived was not revenge and was not triumph, though it looked like both to people who had not been paying attention. It was simply Owen being Owen, seeing clearly what others had overlooked, valuing what others had discarded, and holding firmly to the things that mattered while everything else rearranged itself around them. Millfield would tell the story differently, depending on who was telling it. Some would say Owen had outmaneuvered Diana Voss. Some would say he had taken advantage of her mistake. Neither version captured it exactly. What had actually happened was quieter and more final. A man who had been underestimated had simply continued being himself, which turned out to be enough, and then considerably more than enough. He had told Bonnie, on the steps of the house on Cartmill Road, that people looked at them the way they did because they didn't know who he was yet. Sitting in the parking lot of Calloway Auto on a quiet Tuesday morning, watching his daughter walk toward the front door with her chin up and her hands in her jacket pockets, Owen thought that he had not been entirely honest with her about that. The truth, he thought, was simpler and stranger. Most people never really look at all.